is a very big piece of music. It's in 4 big movements, and in the finale, Beethoven seems like he's throwing in the kitchen sink. He even uses a chorus and 4 vocal soloists and a large orchestra. In fact, the Ninth Symphony is such a big piece of music that we cannot fit it into a single hour of radio. It lasts more than 1 hour. But that gives us a rare opportunity today. In the second half of today's program, we will hear the first 2 movements of the Ninth Symphony, but now we have a little time.
Does anybody have any corrections?
If I may.
Evan?
I did review these and didn't see anything substantial to make note of, so unless there's someone else has something to bring forward in that regard, I would just go ahead and move approval as presented.
I wasn't there. Is this going to create a problem for approving it?
We have a quorum.
We have
so
a quorum,
can vote.
so you can abstain.
It'll be 3 with an abstention. So, second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll abstain.
Aye. So we have 3 ayes and 1 abstention. Movement passes. Our third order of business, I would actually like to make a motion to move that to the end of the meeting.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second.
Sorry, I do have one question before you do that.
Yes, sir.
You are still officially the vice chair then?
Correct.
Okay.
So we can have our meeting and then discuss how we want to switch positions
one of the
after we
reasons to do it.
Right. Then no problem.
Okay. So I have a motion and a second.
Aye.
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 Aye. Have a motion, a second, and 4 ayes. Therefore, we are going to skip 3 and go to 4, so we will have a public hearing for the conditional use permit application for 318 South Howard Street.
Good evening. Before you tonight, we have a conditional use permit application for a guest house at 318 South Howard Street. The property owner is proposing to construct and use the second floor of an accessory structure as a guest house at 318 South Howard Street. The proposed guest house will have 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a living room, and a dining/great room. The guest house will provide guest accommodation year-round with no food or beverage service, and the accessory structure will include a double garage for use by the principal structure, and 1 parking space will be added to the south of the accessory structure for use by the guests. The property is located here, outlined in red, on the east side of South Howard Street between East 3rd and East 5th. And here's just a closer look at the property showing that it has alley access via the Howard Monroe Alley. Here's the floor plan submitted by the applicant for the proposed guest house. As you can see, it has 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, the living room, and a large dining/great room. The subject property is within the moderate density single-family residential R2 district. In this district, accessory living quarters serving as a guest house or domestic servant quarters are permitted via conditional use permit. Within the zoning code, a guest house is defined as a detached structure being an accessory to a single-family dwelling with not more than 2 bedrooms, having no kitchen facilities, and which shall be used and or designed for use primarily by guests or servants for sleeping quarters only. As previously mentioned, the subject property is located in the R2 zone. As you can see, most adjacent properties are also within the R2 zone. Across the street, across Howard Street, properties are located within the multifamily district R4. Subject property is a just over 6,000 square foot parcel with an existing single-family dwelling. Property is accessed via South Howard Street with rear access via the Howard Monroe Alley. Howard Street is a 30-foot wide local residential street with curb, gutter, and sidewalk on both sides, and the alley is 20 feet in width. As previously mentioned, the majority of adjacent properties are within the R2 zone and are similarly situated with single-family dwellings and garages in the rear accessed via the alley. There is some multifamily use to the south and a duplex on a parcel to the northeast. Otherwise, most of the properties are single-family dwellings. The properties across Howard Street in the R4 zone include the American Legion cabin and Frontier Communications building, but all other uses nearby are residential in character. These are just some photos of the alley. The white structure there on the top photo is actually on the parcel to the north of the subject property, and the accessory structure will be constructed just to the south of that. The photo on the bottom right is just another example of a accessory structure, double garage there facing the alley. Relating this application to the comprehensive plan, Chapter 2, Land Use and Community Character, designates the subject property as neighborhood conservation. Neighborhood conservation areas are intended to preserve the character of existing residential neighborhoods. An objective of Chapter 2 is to protect existing neighborhood identity and character by preventing unintended impacts to established neighborhoods with cohesive character and community identity, and utilizing neighborhood conservation designations to protect and promote the existing neighborhood feel. Staff's recommendation tonight is to conduct a public hearing and consider all testimony presented and approve the application for a conditional use permit for a guest house at 318 South Howard Street with no conditions.
Thank you. Questions for?
Yeah, just a couple simple ones, I hope. The CUP is required for the dwelling portion of the structure,
Correct.
and so if it were just a garage, there would be no CUP
right.
required. Okay. And then the definition of guest house, so I understand that this is not a dwelling that could be used for lodging, or lodging for compensation for people who would pay. It's not like for rent or anything like that, is it?
Not for long-term housing. Can be for like weekend accommodations, guest accommodations.
Okay, so I guess that's my question.
So
Because if it starts to be for compensation, it starts to sound a lot like a bed and breakfast, which is requires a different permit under the code. So I assume this is just for like family members and things like that is the intention. Is the code's intention?
Well, the code does not specify that it's not for compensation. So I think the understanding is it can be used for compensation as well.
So how would it be distinguished from a bed and breakfast then? Because this then becomes a 2-bedroom bed and breakfast if it's for compensation.
A bed and breakfast has food served. I know that's one difference. This one says...
This requires food. It doesn't have its own... I mean, the assumption is that the people who are staying here are going to eat they don't have a kitchen, right?
I can grab my book really quick and tell you.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to... I thought it was simple.
Can't remember.
I just want to make sure we know what we're approving. I mean, I'm not objecting to it. I don't... Because if it's... I mean, we have the capacity to approve bed and breakfasts in R2, I think, right?
Yeah, let me
Okay,
just-
yeah, go ahead.
So the bed and breakfast is a building occupied by its owner in which lodging and breakfast or meals are provided for not more than 6 roomers for compensation on less than a weekly basis. So it does specify for compensation and that meals are provided.
So that presumably this can't be for compensation. As an accessory structure to the main dwelling unit, it's in effect the same dwelling unit.
Again, all I can say is it doesn't specify that it's not for compensation, so I think therefore it can be.
Okay.
Did I understand you on the bed and breakfast it's a building where the owner occupies as well, is that right?
Yeah, and
That's not, is this considered to be an owner occupied if it's or if it's a separate building on the property?
I think that means they just have to be on the property. They need to be either occupied in the principal dwelling.
So remember, accessory, this is defined as an accessory living quarters, right?
Yes.
So it has to be a part of the primary use of the property. It can't be,
It's accessory to the single-family dwelling.
right, so which I think means it can't be provided, it can't be leased out for compensation, because it's part of the single-family dwelling, in effect. Right, the definition of accessory requires that it be accessory, it can't be different from the primary use, it has to be a component of the primary use. I don't recall the exact language there.
It's just subordinate.
Subordinate to the primary use.
dwelling.
And
Yeah.
the primary use is single-family dwelling,
Right.
not a business.
Right.
Okay, so it can't then, I'm proposing at least
I see
adding
where
that
you're
as a
going with this.
condition. Yeah.
That's correct. We're not providing a potential conditional use permit for a bed and breakfast.
Right.
Yeah. I would like it to be clear on that point.
Right, and it may end up becoming a condition at the end.
Sorry, Rebecca, I thought it was simple.
Jerry, did you have a second question?
No, it was just, I wanted to make sure that I understood that a garage could be built, because this is both a garage and a
Right.
accessory dwelling
Yep.
unit, right? Okay.
Evan, you got a question for Rebecca?
Yes.
Yeah, just a couple. Right now, there's no street access to the property for a vehicle. It's all through the alley.
I'm sorry, what?
There's no access to the property from Howard Street. It's now through the alley only.
There is access to the property off of Howard Street.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So there was on Howard and the alley.
Okay. Let me.
So it fronts Howard Street, and then the alley runs in the rear.
So, but there's no driveway.
No, there's no vehicle access onto the property.
That's what I was
from Howard.
asking. So, and the accessory dwelling isn't taking an existing building and converting it. It's going to be
Yeah. Right.
built.
It's a new structure.
Has there been a application with a plan for that submitted?
There has, yep.
So it's,
Yep, there's already a building permit that's been issued actually for the garage with no plans for the guest house. It was just permitted as storage until this application was reviewed.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions for?
Just a quick one. First of all, I'm sorry that I missed the first 4 minutes after 7 there. You guys have been just busy.
You didn't miss much, Linda.
Apparently quite a lot. But anyway, my apologies to everyone for not making it at 7 precisely. This would, let me make absolutely sure that I've got it in my hot little hand as to what we're doing. The applicant says, I want to build a garage. He's got a building permit, or they've got a building permit for that purpose. But now it's, the request is, actually, we want the garage really to be a guest house. Is that correct?
The intention is to have a garage with a guest house above it, yes. But they want a garage regardless, so they're building that. And
So
then,
the garage would be down on the bottom, and
Yes.
the guest would come and climb some stairs and go to the second floor, which would be this facility. Is that
Correct.
what's anticipated? And all of the other properties surrounding it are single-family or duplex, is that right?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for City Council? Seeing none, you are free to sit. And I would like to open up the public hearing and ask the applicant to come forward and, excuse me, tell us what you're doing.
Thanks for coming out. Appreciate your time.
Please state your name and address for the
Sure.
record. for us.
I'm Nathaniel Ely. I'm the owner of 318 South Howard, and I'm here applying for a permit for a guest house. As Becky already stated, we got permits already for the garage, and from the get-go, our intention was to have a guest house above it as a package deal. And so when I approached the city, that was in the initial discussions, and we got permits to build the garage and have started on that already. In good faith that we could also get a guest house permit. I would be interested to see the the issue of the compensation clarified, because our understanding was that there was no issue with being compensated for the use of a guest house. Other folks that we know in town have guest houses that are in single-family, low residential districts, and there's no problem there at all. The differentiation that I understood, and I would love to have that clarified, was that a bed and breakfast, they actually produce food and actually serve food, and we explicitly do not intend to do that. And also it said that the owner has to live in the premises for a bed and breakfast, and we're obviously not going to be living in the house at the same time, or the guest house at the same time as guests would be there. So there's definitely a difference there, and I would love to see that clarified before we move forward, I guess. Is there any code that we can check? Okay, great. Any other questions that you all have for me?
Yeah. Sorry, Joe.
Go ahead. You may have the same question I do. Go ahead.
Well, I'd like you to describe what it's going to be used for.
Yeah. So basically, it's overnight guest accommodations. So that's where we would. It's in lieu of what might be like a chain hotel or something like that, where you just need to spend the night, come watch the game, and people need a place to stay. And for my wife and I, it's a way that we can actually afford to build the structure and hope to pay it off long term. So. And also, I would point out that this may not have direct bearing on this, because it's the guest house is a permitted use through the process. But next door there's a triplex. On the other side is a rental. On the other side of that is a rental. That's the duplex. On the other side of that is a rental, and on the back is a rental. And the whole neighborhood's a rental area. So, and across the street is R4, and it's not only R4, it's commercial. So.
Well, I think with your response, you kind of answered my question. I was going to ask you to define a guest, and it sounds to me like you would define a guest as a non-member who would be providing compensation to stay there for a night or two.
Yeah, we define it by the code. I believe defines the guest house, and that's what we're applying for. So.
I have a question regarding the proposed structure, and I'm assuming this would have to meet code anyway. But have you dealt with the height of your structure with the city yet?
Absolutely, yeah. The plans are already approved. There's not going to be any physical modification to the plans. We would hope not at this point in terms of the shell. It's exactly the same as it would be built whether the guest house is approved or not. Yeah, and it does meet the height requirement.
Okay.
I think this is really going back to Becky. When we talk about bed and breakfasts involving structures where the owners of the property are living there, you don't live in your garage, but you certainly use your garage as part of your domestic arrangement. I mean, if you have a garage, which I don't, but I'd like to have one. Having that, you're not living in it, but you're occupying the property, and you're using the garage as part of your activity. And having something above the garage where you have guests come and stay, that sounds like a bed and breakfast to me. But the fact that they're not providing any meals, how does that work into that?
Well, just to clarify, the guest house does not say that it needs to be owner-occupied. That's in the bed and breakfast definition.
I understand,
okay.
But what I'm saying is that it's owner-occupied in the sense that the garage is being used by whoever is living in the main house.
So you're just asking about the serving of food?
No, I'm asking about, does that mean that having somebody living above the garage that you are using as part of your use of your home, isn't that occupying the garage, owner occupied?
Yeah, I guess you could say that it is, but I guess I don't understand the relevance of that.
It sounds to me like this is a bed and breakfast without the breakfast.
It meets the definition of a guest house. We have the option of a guest house within the zoning code.
Okay.
For a conditional use permit.
All right. That's our staff recommendation. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions for Mr. Eagle?
Yeah.
Jerry?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I want to make sure we remembered we're in the public hearing part.
Yeah, right.
I have a question for Becky, so not from Mr.
Okay.
Eden.
I have just one more.
Okay.
And I just want to clarify, single-family usage doesn't matter whether it's a rental or an owner-occupied
Yeah.
facility. So
That's correct. So many people are renting around just for compensation. Absolutely, yeah.
that's not a problem.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a
But
problem.
if the usage is
Yeah.
primarily single-family, I think that may be an important consideration here.
Any more questions for Mr. Ely? I think we're good.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else that would like to come up and speak in favor of this conditional use permit? Please come up to the podium and state your name and address.
Hello, my name is Timothy Vandenbroek, and I live at 620 East 3rd Street, which is on the corner of Howard and 3rd, kind of kitty corner across from the applicant address. I wanted to speak in favor of it as a local property owner, where I think one of the reasons I'm pleased to see someone taking an interest in the property is in our area of town, which is not in the heart of the Fort Russell, but is obviously heading to the south of that. Property improvement is, I think, a very good thing for our area, and so as something that's a conditional use within the code, I think the setting is fitting, and I can see it out in my front window, and just wanted to let you know that as a property owner, I was pleased somebody's interested in the property and looking to put money into improving it, and I think thereby improving our neighborhood.
Thank you. Any other people who would like to speak in favor of this CUP? Seeing none, I would like to invite anybody who would like to make any other or comments in opposition to CUP. Please come up and state your name and address for us, please.
I'm Joanne Manita. I live 203 South Howard, up the block from this. I'm not speaking in opposition. I just have a question because my hearing isn't that good. Is compensation allowed or not? I heard both.
My understanding is yes. Is that correct? It's
That's
just
my
that food is
understanding.
not served there.
It is.
Why don't we, you know what I think, Becky, probably.
I've not been able to confirm the answer to that question yet, but my understanding is that if it is not specifically addressed within the zoning code, that it's assumed that it is allowed, and we have led the applicant to believe that it is allowed.
What is being proposed is actually a boarding house, per the definition in the code, which is a conditional use within this district, but is not what is before us. A boarding house is defined as a building occupied by its owner, and I think accessory structures count, in which not more than 6 roomers, lodgers, and/or boarders are housed or fed for compensation on a weekly or longer basis. I mean, we don't. There's nothing in the code that authorizes.
Did I hear you say weekly or longer?
Weekly or longer. I mean, that's the closest. But that's the closest.
But if
it
it's
comes.
not weekly or longer, then it can't be a boarding house.
Then it's a hotel.
Or if it's less than...
Commercial venture or it's a vacation.
So I think the answer, and we'll talk about this later, I think the answer is no, this is not allowed in this district. But we'll talk about that. But
Yeah, I just don't see how you can vote unless you know.
oh, we can.
Hopefully you would not choose to. And again, a conditional use permit, how do you know people are only going to stay a week or less? Does anyone supervise whether or not this is rented out and thus does become a boarding house?
Actually, Rebecca, I would defer that back to you. Who would monitor?
No, it's not monitored.
It's not monitored.
I understood it's complaint driven.
You would.
That's That's correct. It is complaint driven. If there was a neighbor that complained that someone was living there continuously or something, then we would look into it.
See, that's a difficult thing because then you get your neighbors having to spy on you to make sure you're following the code. That's a situation in our neighborhood too. So.
Thank you. See another person? Please come up and state your name for us and address.
My name's Janet Peterson. I live at 717 East 3rd Street. And as mentioned in the presentation, there will be a parking spot in the alley for whoever is staying in this guest house. And as also mentioned by the owner of the property, there are lots of rentals around us. I am not a rental. I do own my home, and my access to my garage and my driveway are from the alley. And I am very concerned about the increased traffic because it sounds to me like this is something that's going to be rented on weekends for games and like the upcoming political conventions, which will be a lot of increased traffic in an alley that already has a lot of traffic due to the triplex that's south of him, which has a lot of student traffic. And when the snow comes, we have berms on the side, which leads people to park out in the alley. I'm just really concerned about the increase of traffic, so I do object to this.
So if I could clarify for you, are you concerned about the traffic through the alley or parking in the alley?
Both. Okay. Any more
Thank you.
Comments?
No.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to make comments regarding this CUP? Seeing none, I would like to close the public hearing and open this up for board discussion. Jerry.
Okay, so Rebecca, I think this one is a simple question. An owner of a single-family home, is that person allowed to rent out a bedroom in the home for any period of time?
Yes, as long as the number of residents in the home meets the definition of a family.
Okay. So they can, all right. And the definition of a family is?
That's not an easy one.
Is it four? No more than four unrelated people?
So any number of related, not more than four unrelated. Two persons who are not related and any number of additional persons related to either of those two persons. And then the other one has to do with physically handicapped or elderly.
And when you said that they are allowed to rent out a room within a home, that's on a long-term basis. Is that defined specifically?
Yes, it's as long as the number of people within a dwelling meet the definition of a family. So if there's a 3-person family and they want to rent a room out to one person, that would be 4 people.
Okay.
It's fine.
All right. So the issue here is that this is an accessory use. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's a conditional use permit for an accessory use, which is a minor second use, which is used in conjunction with but subordinate to its primary use. So it has to be part of the primary use. It cannot be an additional use. So unless the proposed use is allowed as a permitted use in the district, in this case a single-family home, then it can't be an accessory use. Is that?
I'm not following.
Okay. So this has been proposed as an accessory use, which means it has to be part of the primary use on the property. That's how accessory uses are defined by the code. Okay, and so unless the primary use of this particular parcel allows specifically what the person is proposing, that is to rent out rooms within the house for a single night basis to whoever might show up, then it can't be approved as an accessory use.
I don't think that that's the case because you can have a bed and breakfast, which is an accessory use that can be on the same.
A bed and breakfast is a specifically designated use, albeit via conditional use. This is an accessory use. Right?
Okay.
That is how it's been proposed, right, as an accessory use, not as a separate, because if we can walk through the code, and it delineates the various uses, and this is not one of them. This is proposed as an accessory to the single-family dwelling, right? That's how the application has been presented.
Correct.
Okay. And my understanding is that single-family homes cannot operate like hotels, which then means that accessory use to a single-family home cannot be used in the way that this particular use has been described. Certainly, if it's provided for family guests or servants, the way it's defined, then that's totally fine. But if it's being used for compensation in the way described, that's not part of a single-family use and thus can't be accessory to it. So that's my perspective.
Evan, comments?
Yeah, I had just a couple comments, and then I'm going to go back to what Mr. Ely said, that it forms the basis of my opinion right now, and that is that, just as Jerry pointed out, that they really don't intend this to use an extension of their family or to help the primary function of the existing dwelling. And then I had, to me, it seems like a vacation rental, which some places have codes about and how you can handle those, which we don't here. And then I always have concerns when we're building something new like this, whether the code requirements are actually addressing commercial or residential aspects of the building, because we're in some ways endorsing a commercial venture in a residential zone without requiring the commercial oversight of the building code. So those are the things that come to mind immediately for me.
I would like to further Evan's comments by stating if I was trying to draw a set of drawings for a hotel, I'd have to comply with accessibility. If I was adding something on to my home for my own family's use, then that doesn't comply. So I think in order for these drawings to actually comply for the applicant to even build what he's proposing, the building department would have to define its use, and I'm unclear on what that is right now, because I don't know what codes would apply to the construction permitting of the proposal.
As I understand the situation, the way they have presented it to the city, it passes muster with the city officials. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And as I understand it, the applicant's been fairly transparent with what is going to happen with the city. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't a secret to the city. And
It was written in the application that it was a benefit to the public because it's an infill project with public benefit of lodging.
Okay. And the way it's been presented, at least as far as a guest house, to your knowledge, there's nothing that would prohibit, and I understand what Jerry's saying, but there's nothing that would prohibit, at least to your knowledge at this point, what the applicant's trying to accomplish. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Unfortunately, that's not my understanding. When I look at this, I think that the idea generally it's a commendable one. You know, I'd like to do something. I'd like to have an infill issue. The problem with this is that it looks kind of like the beginning of a zone change to something other than single family, and I just don't think that is appropriate. Now, if it is for the family, that kind of thing, well, we have portions of the code that directly relate to that. I think that the willingness of the staff to say, yeah, this looks fine, it's an infill project, it's a good deal, I think that they've missed a very important point, and that is the effect on the general nature of the neighborhood. I love it when people improve their property. That's a good thing. But I do not love it when the improvement to the property is essentially a development in an area, in a direction that changes the zoning character of the property and encourages others around to do the same thing. If you want a zone change to a duplex or multifamily zone, fine. But this is, with the commercial use of this property, I don't think it's appropriate.
Jerry?
Yeah, additional part of my comment, the definition of family, we didn't hear all of it, includes that all of the individuals in the household are living together as a single housekeeping unit, which means that all of them enjoy a common right to use the entire dwelling. So the actual that is the actual permitted use in this zone. And so, in fact, the only way in which somebody can rent out in the R2 zone something in this fashion is either to be a bed and breakfast or a boarding house. Otherwise, I mean, under our code, if it's not specifically permitted, it's prohibited.
Right.
And so in this case, the use proposed by the applicant is in fact prohibited by our zoning code.
But we determined that it can't meet the definition of a boarding house. Is that right?
So it would have to be a bed and breakfast. It could meet the definition of a bed and breakfast.
So how do we
just
square
with
that
really
with the,
thin
with
breakfast?
the definition of a guest house here that says a detached structure being an accessory to a single-family dwelling with not more than 2 bedrooms, having no kitchen facilities, and which shall be used and or designated for use primarily by guests and or servants for sleeping quarters only.
Because it's accessory to a single family use. And so the assumption is that the people in the guest house would in fact be part of the same housekeeping unit. It's an accessory to a family. It's part of the family.
Yeah.
That's how accessory is defined. I mean, I want to be clear that we're not opposed to the notion. It's just not in the right box. I mean, I'm not personally opposed to it. It's just not in the right box. And we'd want to be clear what we're approving. This is not an accessory use, as proposed.
Just to throw some more fuel on this fire we have building here, I also like to consider that a CUP goes with the property and not with the owners and their good intentions and whatever. It'll be there forever. And the Moscow Code doesn't, right now, limit the number of these that could show up in any zone. So when one person did it and showed that it seemed like a good idea, their neighbor could, and their neighbor could, and their neighbor could, and that's what Linda's getting on to. You know, in 20 years, then you've changed an entire neighborhood to a different use, because we haven't ever said that, well, there can't be too many guest houses and define that number in any certain neighborhood.
Joe?
Well,
sorry.
I've got another, going back to the design of, if a guest or servant as a sleeping quarters were someone with a disability that could not get up the steps, my interpretation of it being accessible as part of the overall residence is that that person, since they can't get to this second floor, would be able to sleep in a room at an accessible level. So again, I have difficulty in the building department's approval of the plans without consideration of accessibility. Jerry?
Yeah, I move that. And before doing so, before I say this, I'd certainly invite the applicant to submit a CUP request for a bed and breakfast, which I think this fits within, and I think it would be perceived kindly, but I move that we deny the motion as presented.
Second.
Or deny the application, not the motion. Excuse me.
Second.
I have a motion and a second.
We can have further discussion, but I'm ready.
Further discussion before we vote? Mark? Okay. All right.
Aye.
Jerry?
Aye.
Nay. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes, or the motion to deny passes with 4 ayes, 1 nay. All right, that takes us to our next agenda item, which is a public hearing for a conditional use permit application for 519 North Grant Street.
Could I Just never. Do we want to go over relevant criteria and standards for this at this time for our?
I guess I'd like clarification on that, since it was denied.
Well, we've had this discussion before, but it's a good thing to have in the record, I think.
Yes, you need to do the RCS even if it's denied.
Yeah.
In this particular case, the proposal as described to us is not authorized by the zoning ordinance. And so there are no relevant criteria. It is not an appropriate application. There's no reason to run through the relevant criteria and standards. It's not something that is allowed in the R2 zone. That was the basis for my decision. It is a proposed commercial venture accessory to a single-family dwelling, which is not allowed.
I think that needs to be stated in the RCS. The applicant always has an option to appeal, and the appeal is based on the relevant criteria and standards.
Well, the appeal is based on the entirety of the record, including all of our
including
conversations.
The RCS.
Yeah, but it's housekeeping.
So that's the problem. Is none of them are even relevant in this context, because there's no point in walking through them when, we could say the development standards articulated by number 2 are not the zoning ordinance presumably, but it wouldn't satisfy number 2 because it's not authorized by the zoning code.
That's what I was looking for. Is which of the 7 we can refer to as being the main reason for?
Well, again, it's not the relevant criteria and standards. If it had been a proposed bed and breakfast, which is authorized by the zoning ordinance, we could walk through them and assess them independently. But where it's something that's not authorized by the zoning ordinance, then it doesn't make any sense, because you're trying to justify denying something that the code doesn't allow.
So they're irrelevant criteria. Cool.
But if make it simpler, then we could simply say everything I just said, that it is our understanding is that a commercial enterprise in a single family as an accessory to a single family dwelling is not authorized by the zoning ordinance, and based on the relevant criteria and standards, it therefore cannot, under any circumstances, satisfy number 2. It cannot meet the applicable development standards, even if we even get to that. And I think that provides sufficient information to the council should it be appealed, or to a court should they try to review it as well.
I think that we can perhaps address a couple more of those, because, for example, number 3, will the proposed use be injurious or detrimental to adjoining properties or the neighborhood? I think we could refer to the fact that the proposed use, not only is it not permitted in this zone as defined here, but if such a use were constructed there would be negative effects for adjacent property owners and occupiers for lack of parking and or parking conflicts as well as traffic conflicts. For example, we could do that if the board wished to.
I personally think that we shouldn't touch any of them. I think we should simply state our understanding is that it's not authorized by the zoning ordinance in the event. I don't want to prejudge a proposal that might come for a bed and breakfast, because we haven't, in fact, really discussed or received enough information to make a determination on the other 7. And so the applicant could come back to us with a different proposal, and I would be worried about having, in effect, prejudged that proposal before it gets to us. Because from my perspective, and my motion was based not on any of the relevant criteria and standards, but simply on the fact that this is not an accessory structure or use, period. That was...
Well...
And so I'm not going to support anything other than that.
Well, if we leave it as it is, and the staff, in consultation with our city attorney, says, we do need some response from the board and questions us specifically on relevant criteria and standards, we can meet again and address that. So do nothing until you hear from them.
I do think it's important that the minutes of the meeting reflect the justification for the decision. Are they? I mean, do we have something reflecting that? Okay, then I'm satisfied.
Evan?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to suggest is an alternative to basically the two-part statement that Jerry offered and put that down under all 7 criteria. I think it actually addresses them all pretty well. Even though it would seem repetitive or redundant, I think it does. But we can...
Because the use isn't what's proposed, doesn't match.
Right, because
proposed.
each begins with the proposed use, and we answer the proposed use
Doesn't match.
doesn't match whatever is described under that particular criterion.
It could say simply the proposed use is not authorized by the zoning ordinance.
That's,
Do we have a motion and a second?
I'll move that we address each of the elements with the statement that the proposed use is not authorized under the definitions of the zoning ordinance, and that...
As an accessory to a single-family dwelling, because, sort of generally speaking, it is authorized, but not under this application.
As an accessory.
As an accessory to a single-family dwelling.
So if we get that down as the single statement and put that under all 7 of the criteria, I move that to be our statement of relevant criteria.
And do you have that? Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. A roll.
Aye.
Jerry?
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
Yeah.
That that movement passes with 3 ayes and 2 nays. Now we will move on to the next agenda item, which is our conditional use permit at 519 North Grant.
All right. Next, we have a conditional use permit application for a Type 2 accessory home occupation at 519 North Grant Street. The applicant is proposing to operate a gunsmith business at 519 North Grant Street. The business will consist of gun repair and restoration, maintenance, and accurizing of firearms. The business will be located within the existing home and the attached garage. The owner will be the only employee. Pickup and drop-off of firearms will be by appointment only, and the applicant is not anticipating any increase in commercial traffic or alterations to the site or structure in order to begin the business. Oops. Property is located here, outlined in red, on the west side of North Grant Street, just north of East D Street. The subject property is within the moderate-density, single-family residential R2 district. Within this zone, in all residential zones, Type 1 accessory home occupations are a permitted use. These Type 1 occupations have no on-site employees and no customer services. In the R2 zone, Type 2 accessory home occupations are a conditionally permitted use. And in all residential zones, not just in R2. A Type 2 home occupation may have up to 1 additional on-site employee and or on-site customer service. There are standards that an accessory home occupation must meet. I'm just going to read through these. All activities must be conducted indoors, all business activities. The dwelling and the subject property shall remain residential in character. No more than 1 vehicle shall be discernible as being used in association with the home occupation. Deliveries and pickups associated with the business shall be allowed only between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m., and no home occupation shall produce any nuisances incompatible with the characteristics of the neighborhood, such as fumes, odors, dust, heat, noise, etc. As I mentioned, this property is located within the R2 zone, and as you can see, all adjacent properties are also within the R2 zone. The subject property is just under 7,000 square foot parcel. It has an existing family dwelling with an attached garage. It's accessed via North Grant Street only. Grant Street is a 30-foot wide local residential street with curbing on both sides but no sidewalks. And the surrounding properties are all similar in character and consist of single-family dwellings, with the exception of the Moscow Middle School, which is located to the east on East D Street. As you can see in this photo, it's not adjacent to the subject property, but further east. These are just some photos of the site to give you an idea of the character of the street. The proposed occupation will go in the residence shown in the bottom left, and then there's a photo of the type of the use on that street. Relating this to the comprehensive plan, Chapter 2, Land Use and Community Character, designates the subject property as neighborhood conservation. Neighborhood conservation areas are intended to preserve the character of existing residential neighborhoods. And Chapter 6, Economic Development, outlines a goal to provide for sustainable economic growth and employment opportunities where existing and new businesses can thrive while preserving and enhancing the character of the community. Staff's recommendation is to conduct a public hearing, consider testimony presented, and approve this application for a conditional use permit for a Type 2 accessory home occupation at 519 North Grant Street with no conditions. Thank you.
Any questions for Rebecca? Jerry?
Rebecca, this might actually be better for the applicant, but do you know what accurizing means in this context?
That would be better for the applicant,
Okay.
but I assume it just means making the firearms more accurate.
So then this is also likely better for the applicant. But no, this part I can like you to confirm. The firing of firearms is not allowed within this area, I assume, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions for Rebecca? All right. At this point, I'd like to open up the public hearing for this CUP and ask the applicant to come up, state his name and address, and tell us what you're doing.
Thank you. Barry Steele, 519 North Grant, the subject of the hearing. I want to thank Rebecca for her help and Ernst in walking through this process. This all kind of started as I'm getting close to retirement. I'm a 25-year resident of Moscow. I've worked for the University of Idaho for the same job for 27 years. We're invested in the community. As a matter of fact, my wife just came from Parks and Rec commission meeting. As I'm starting to look forward to retirement, looking at something to do, I hunt, I fish, I do those kind of things, and so this kind of drew me towards doing some gunsmithing, which I do on my own firearms, as now. The whole CUP thing kind of came about as a fact as I'm looking forward to, if I'm getting into this, of obtaining an FFL, which is a federal firearms license. To do that, I need to be in compliance with code and obviously want to do things right. The one thing that makes this is that having that potentially by codes, having customers come to the house, picking up, dropping off, is what kicked it over the accessory too, as you know. But in doing it right, the CUP was due to the customers coming to the house, and the FFL, and then obviously the other part of this is my education, which I can start now with tapes and summer classes and things like that as I continue to advance. But it's really as a home hobby type retirement business. What I plan to do: firearm disassembly, repair, cleaning, scope installation, some sight installation that doesn't require milling. I don't plan on getting into a big lathe and a milling process. If I have to do that, I'll send it out. The bedding and accurizing. Bedding is a process where you match the stock to the barrel, which is basically fiberglass. Pillar, whether you're bedding or pillar bedding, some of those kind of things, which is more of a fiberglass work. The accurizing part of it is just getting the scopes on right. Sometimes teaching people how to use their weapon, teaching them how to go and do the reloading and stuff, to match rounds to that firearm. Now, what I don't plan on doing is obviously discharge of a firearm in the city limits is frowned upon. I don't plan on doing retail sales of firearms or ammunition. I don't plan on running competition with Tri-State or Sure Shot or anything. That's not my goal. Gun manufacturing in any way, again, I don't have the talent or the time to learn it or the equipment to do big barreling jobs and things like that, or any type of commercial ammunition work. That's not my goal. security and safety, which I'm sure is an issue and should be. Obviously, I'll comply with all FFL rules and regulations of a federal firearms license and documentation. All firearms in my possession will be held in a secure storage, i.e. a safe, steel lockup, when they're not being serviced or worked on. General shop safety of fire extinguishers, flammable material storage, and things like that. Obviously, this is my home. I don't want anything bad to happen to my own house. I guess the only thing, the changing of the garage door to a French door type thing or whatever to provide more security, actually, and deadbolts and those kind of things into the area. So that's really, unless there's any questions, thank you for the opportunity to do this, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have one, just kind of a clarification for the record. This sounds like it's something that you're planning to run and operate as a sole proprietor without employees. Is that?
That is correct. I don't. If I make money on this, I and my wife will both be surprised.
Fair enough. Jerry?
I might be revealing a little bit too much about my own history with saying this, but my primary concern involves the large structure to your east, the junior high. And I was wondering if you just described to us, several of us presumably have been there when the buses let out and know how many kids there are, and if you describe kind of how your particular street, whether you see a lot of students going up and down the street, whether it's the type of place, if they heard about it in some way would be attracted to. That's really the only concern I have is the proximity to all of the junior high students.
Having lived there for 25 years, I can tell you we have a lot less junior high traffic on it now, that the lot to our west is actually inhabited, and I put up a fence because they used to cut from the junior high, cross the neighbors, cross Grant, between my house and then into the old, for those of you around here long enough to remember when there was an ice house back there.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, that's all gone. So the actual foot traffic of students is not on Grant Street anymore, other than the neighbors who live and walk out. The attraction of it being, that I'm doing this out of my home, I don't plan on hanging a sign up in front of the house and let them know that there's a gunsmithing business there. I
guess that was my primary concern.
I don't think that'd be allowed by code anyway.
No.
Being a home business.
Okay. And do you, so kind of a similar follow-up question, to what extent are you going to be required to have ammunition on your property in association with this? And what quantity do you anticipate having?
The only ammunition that I plan, again, with what I plan on doing, will be none. With the exception if somebody's having a problem with a particular firearm, with it feeding and doing those kind of things because they're reloading their own, there might be the possibility of them bringing that. Other than that, again, no retail sales, no commercial manufacturing of ammunition.
Okay. That's all I had.
Evan, did you have a question for Mr. Sutherland?
I was going to ask about the signs and whether or not he was planning to have any signage about his business, and whether or not I didn't know if our city code allowed that with a home occupied business or not anyway, so.
It would just be pursuant to the sign code. There are signs that are allowed within R2.
Okay.
It's just limited in size and restricted based on the sign code.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Joe? Would you be opposed to a condition that prohibited you from having a sign advertising your business?
I didn't plan on having a sign.
Okay. Part of that concern is that, as was stated earlier, is that a conditional use permit often can travel from person to person. It's a sign to the property more than that.
I would say I might put a magnetic sign on my truck as I'm hunting and things like that, so that people know that there might be somebody in town, since there are, at this point in time, I believe only 2 gunsmiths in the Moscow area.
And Jerry, you're referring more to signage on the property, not on a vehicle.
And my only concern is creating some sort of attractive nuisance for the students in the area. I just don't want them to know that potentially there's a whole bunch of guns right there, is all I'm concerned about.
I would not be opposed to that.
Do we have any other questions for Mr. Steele? Seeing none,
Thank you.
Sit. Is there anybody who would like to speak in favor of this CUP? Please give us your name and address.
Jeff Breed, and I live at 513 North Grant, which is the house directly to the south to Barry's. And Barry and I have been neighbors for 25 years. I know him to be an excellent neighbor. You could ask anything of him, and he would do it for you. And, he's always the first person around the neighborhood to help out if someone needs anything. He's a man of integrity. He thoroughly plans things out, and I can testify to this because whenever I need to do some sort of a woodworking project that I just want to slap together, he'll go, no, we got to plan this all out. So he is the kind of person that plans this stuff from beginning to end, and so I'm sure that in the case of this project, it'll be the same. And he's a very considerate neighbor of everyone around him, so that I'm sure that the last thing he wants to do is create a neighborhood nuisance. So I'm sure that he'll put the plans of his business aside if there's any causes any stress on our neighborhood block. So that's my testimony. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks. Is there anybody else who would like to speak in favor of this CUP? Seeing none, I open this up to anybody who has any comments against or just general. Seeing none, I close the public hearing and open it to the board to discuss.
I'd like to take a crack at that.
By all means.
This is exactly the kind of application that it's a pleasure to review because it's on point, it's complete, and it's the kind of home business that I appreciate being able to support. And I have absolutely no questions. I think the staff report was complete. Mr. Steele's comments to us were complete. His answers to our questions were just swell. And I'd like to move that we approve this request.
Okay.
Without conditions?
Without any conditions.
I'll second that.
Before we vote, any discussion?
Well, yeah.
Jerry?
Yeah, just ask if anybody would be opposed to adding a condition that there would be no sign on the property itself identifying it as a place. I mean, given that the applicant would not feel opposed to that. Just have some concerns with that close to the junior high.
And I don't think it's necessary.
I don't either.
Although I agree, it's the very point I was going to bring up, the same thing. I'd like to have a condition against signage advertising a gun shop, basically. So,
I suggest we vote, and then if it passes without conditions, it passes. If it doesn't, we'll go back
we'll
to
deal with it.
Again, Joe, do you mind stating your opinion on that? Because if
let's vote, we'll find out what Joe's opinion is.
Well, if three people don't support it, we can just have one vote.
I guess the
we'll
applicant had no issue with it. I guess I'm less concerned about having a signage condition simply because the junior high actually is no longer the junior high. It's actually one grade lower of kids, and I'm less concerned about kids that age being capable of figuring out.
As I said, I might have revealed more about myself.
And actually getting into the building. So I would most likely vote at the motion as stated.
You start from that end of the table.
Knowing also that the signage permit would actually require review anyway through the city. So we have a motion. We have a second.
We start down there.
We'll start down here. Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
The motion is accepted with 4 ayes, 1 nay. So we'll want to run through the...
that's fine.
Yeah, and I would propose that we accept the staff's proposed discussion of the relevant standards and criteria for our own.
Is that a
You'll
motion?
find those on page 4 of 5 of the staff report.
Is that a motion?
I'll move that.
Second.
I have a motion. I have a second.
Aye.
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 The motion is approved with 5 ayes and no nays. have your permit.
Now we get to fight with each other.
Yes.
What for? Do you have any-
All right, that brings us to our election of officers item that was moved. Our previous chair is now the mayor, and so we need to, and it's a new year, so we need to determine who needs to be the chair and who needs to be the assistant. Comments?
I have a motion, or I have a nomination. I'd like to nominate Joe Bozzoli for chair.
Second. Sorry, Joe. Joe, do you, before, actually, we're not supposed to discuss it.
I third it.
I've dodged this bullet for years.
Yes, you have.
It's time.
It's time.
I'm content doing that if the board sees fit.
By acclamation? Or do you want to vote?
Any nomination for a second? Mark Hume is not here. So
unfair to
You want to nail him?
into that, however.
But Evan expressed, I'm willing, Evan expressed, I don't know if that was desire or willingness to serve, the two different things, but if he's cool with it, I'd nominate Evan to serve.
I'd back it.
I would second
As
that.
vice
if
chair.
Evan's
That's
willing to
fine.
play the backup.
I've done both before, so it wouldn't be anything new to me.
So, I guess how this work formally, we have a motion as myself as the chair and Evan as the
Can we do
assistant
both?
chair.
No.
We had
Just
one
do
motion,
Do
got
one
to
at a
vote
time?
you.
Okay.
Yeah, I just nominated, I didn't
Oh,
vote.
gotcha. All right. So,
Aye.
Joe's chair, aye.
do we have to have, does it require a second?
I seconded it.
You seconded it? Okay,
Yeah.
so,
both did.
nomination, we have a motion for me and a second as chair. Aye.
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 That approves with 5 ayes, no nays.
I move Evan be our vice chair.
And I'll
We have a
second
motion, we have a second. Jerry?
Aye.
Aye.
that. Aye.
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 We have a motion and an approval with 5 ayes, no nays, and that would conclude that portion of our agenda. Any board communications or other business?
I have nothing. There's no applications that have been submitted.
Have there been any potential appointments to our vacant seat on the board?
None that I know of.
Linda?
I occasionally respond to the request for, what's the date for the next meeting and so on, with several suggestions for how we might make sure that we're checking, making our lists and checking them twice. And I haven't had any response from any of these. And I think that I can look up all of those things, and the suggestions had to do with avoiding what happened when we had our recent, shall I say,
timing?
guffaffle? Yeah, the timing question that said, we've got to, it was that, the gym proposal, and whether the staff had gone through it, and why was it here. Anyway, I've made some suggestions. Now, if you would prefer that I refer these to the chair officially, I'll be happy to do that. But how do I get some response on those
Well,
things?
what specific, because you asked at one point that you'd be informed what the applications were, right? And this last one specified that. But I guess I'm confused on
Well,
what
I'll have to look.
I don't remember anything else.
There were a couple of things
Were
that had to do with the procedure that we do and that the staff does before we get it, to avoid the apparent mistakes that we've gotten ourselves into.
So you're talking just in terms of
Protocol.
of
I
timing?
interpret that as being directed to staff and not necessarily soliciting our.
Well, I'll tell you, I've asked that for responses. I haven't gotten any. And I think that it would be useful for all of us to take a look at these ideas of protocol and see if we think they're valuable, and ask that we have a general conversation with staff about those. So what I'll do is I'll look those up and send you all an email about it and include the staff on it.
Now, in terms of protocol, I'm not clear if you're referring to protocol on our end of upcoming
Not
things
for
or protocol
us,
from the
but
city standpoint.
From the city coming to us so that we don't waste an applicant's time and so that we can give them a clear, clean decision that is consistent with our code. That's my only goal.
Well, I think this...
Rather than us propose what the protocol should be, I would actually prefer that the city send us, even as a reminder or an update, what the typical protocols are.
Well, Rebecca, you can correct me in this, but, the staff makes a determination whether an application is complete and appropriate, and then submits to us. We only hear completed applications. We don't have any rule before that. And so, obviously, there are days in which I will disagree with the staff's perception of whether, or all of us will disagree, like today, with the staff's perception of whether it was complete and appropriate, but that's Bill's role. That's not really ours, I don't think.
Well, I will pull my comments together. I'll circulate them, and if you feel that it would be appropriate for us to have a general conversation about those, great. If you feel, Linda, that's the staff's job. If you want to become the staff, apply for the job. Then I can deal with that. But
well, you can apply for the job if you want. But
thank you. I've got plenty with my law practice and just getting well. So anyway, I'll put that together. My goal is I want to avoid having applicants come before us and we have a conversation about whether the application did actually meet the legal requirements. I think that we do everyone a disservice if we are not well organized. And there have been a couple of times in the last year that we haven't been quite as well organized as we should have been.
Well, to be clear, that is kind of our, that's what we're here to do. We are the decision-making body.
Yeah, I'll
the one
send
thing,
it to you, and you can look at it.
Rebecca, I do have one request of the city staff. If we can all be provided printed copies of the city code, of the appropriate zoning code, because, I need to get a pad or something, but I end up looking them up on my phone.
You don't have copies of?
I don't. I've never received one of those.
Oh, okay.
I look online.
Yeah.
I was given one, but it was several years back, and I'm not sure if there's actually been a revision since then. In fact, I received it when Evan was on the board.
Yeah, in fact, I think I got mine 10 years ago.
Right. So it would be helpful because when we read through this, and I'm beginning to see what you're talking about, because there are times when Jerry, who specializes in a lot of this code stuff, is aware of things that we're not, that I'm not going to say the city missed, but was interpreting differently. And it would be nice if we all had that in order to not look
at least the language in front of us,
the audience or the people listening, that we don't know what applies and what doesn't.
And obviously we can look online, but I would like a hard copy. So here, when we're here, we can all say, well, the definition of, and we can all look it up. Yeah. I think would be appropriate.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
And can I just I want to stand behind Linda on this because we've had, and it was when Joe first came on the board, we had that same point brought up, she's bringing up now, that we needed to just feel a little stronger about that. And that's the one time I think we did get copies of the code printed out, right when you first started, and so that at least we were reviewing that. And that especially came into play when we were the appeal body, and we did a lot of appeals of decisions by the code administrator or the building official, both, and so...
Aren't we still the
We are still the Board of Appeals.
People just don't appeal stuff now?
Well, we had a lot of them when
it goes to different
directions. So we had a lot for a while. So
I was on that side looking.
But anyway, so what Lynn is saying, even though it seems a little nebulous, is exactly right on. We do need to feel that we know what process brought that application to us.
Well, as I said, I'm going to pull those old emails together and see exactly what it was that was bothering me at that particular moment so that we can either address it or say, meh, don't need it. But I, too, would appreciate a hard copy that I could work from.
We do have the authority to determine our own procedures, which we have never done since I've been here either. We just sort of wing it. But so we have the, whether we follow Robert's rules or whatever it is, we have the capacity to figure that out.
Any other comments?
No, I was going to move adjournment if nobody else.
Okay, that's what I was going to do.
That's what I do.
Second?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. All in favor? This meeting is adjourned.